Hi everyone, and welcome back to class. In today's video, we're going to continue our discussion on the social and ethical theory known as contractarianism, or what is also referred to as the social contract. Now in this video specifically, we're going to be looking at Thomas Hobbes' version of the social contract. Now, if you don't know anything about contractarianism or the idea of a social contract, don't worry. This video should help to give you a nice foundational idea as to what that theory is. But if you want a little bit more background, I suggest you check out the Crito video, in which we talk about Socrates and his version of what is known as social obligation, what many consider to be an ancient precursor to the idea of a social contract. Now, it should be stated before we start that Thomas Hobbes isn't the only person to talk about a social contract or about social political theory. I mean, throughout history, we have his contemporaries like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, but then we have others like Aristotle, Plato, Machiavelli, and many, many more. So Hobbes isn't alone in this discussion of how we should build a society and the right way for a society to run or to be ruled. But what Hobbes does do is he gives us a very interesting and influential version of the social contract, something that all of us appear to live in every single day of our lives. Now, where should we begin? Well, probably the best place for us to begin is to note that Hobbes wrote about the social contract theory in his book, The Leviathan. Now, some of you have probably read The Leviathan, and some of you probably haven't, and that's perfectly fine. If you want to do a little bit more research on this topic yourself, I suggest checking the book out. It's quite long and it is quite dense, but it is filled with a lot of interesting socio-political theory that has to deal with social contract theory, the building of a commonwealth, and how we can safely agree to run a community together as social equals. Now, as a quick kind of paraphrasing as to the philosophy that we get from the Leviathan, let's talk about Hobbes and his idea on what is known as the state of nature. Now, Hobbes believed that humanity existed naturally in a state of pure freedom. Without rules or laws or society, we existed in what was known as the state of nature. As I've already said, this is our natural state in the world without rules or laws or really communities or societies. We are purely free in the state of nature. We can say and do anything that we want. However, it's not just you that gets to say and do anything that you want. Everybody else does as well. So not only can you do anything you want, but your neighbor can do anything you want. I can do anything that I want. Everybody is purely free in the state of nature. Now, Hobbes posits this idea that if everybody had pure radical freedom in this thing we call the state of nature, then we would constantly be living on edge. We would constantly be living in fear. Because without rules or laws or societies, the world breaks down to this almost survival of the fittest type of mentality. Those who have more strength, those who have more resources, will use their power and influence and manipulate and control or abuse those who have less. And those who have less will constantly be in fear of those who have more. So the weak will fear the strong. But conversely, Hobbes also says that the strong will fear the weak. Not the weak individual, but the weak community who gathers together to pull them down and destroy them. So it's both the strong and the weak in this state of nature that does one thing similarly. We constantly fear death. In the state of nature, nothing is safe. You can lie, steal, manipulate. If you want to kick a puppy or rob a baby and steal their candy, you're more than allowed to kick a puppy and steal candy from a baby. In the state of nature, anything goes. However, everybody else can come up and kick your puppy and steal candy from your baby. No one is safe. Nothing is safe. If you have something that somebody else wants, they're allowed to come up and kill you. Because there is no law, there is no compromise, there is nothing to prevent them from doing so. We all just constantly live in this survival of the fittest fear of death, where we constantly have to work and manipulate and lie to succeed and to survive. So Hobbes wants to argue that the state of nature is a very scary place for us, and we don't like that. So what do we do to avoid having to live in a state of nature? Well, Hobbes argues that to get out of the state of nature, we create communities, we create societies, we instill rules and laws that allow for us to live safely and communally together. We create a society in which it's illegal to steal, so I no longer have to worry about you stealing from me. And we create a society where it's now illegal to kill. I no longer have to worry about you killing me, and vice versa. We both agree to give up some of these freedoms. And so this is where the social contract comes in. The idea of a social contract is the consent to be ruled. We allow for ourselves to be ruled by a compromise or a governing body. We allow for ourselves to be ruled by this agreement that we've created with one another. Under the social contract, essentially to be moral is to give up some of your freedoms for certain societal protections, and to follow through with that agreement. You have to follow through with the agreement under the social contract to be a moral person. So you have to follow through with the freedoms you've given up, and you have to be able to maintain the protections that you're being given. It is a give and take under this idea of the social contract. So under the idea of the social contract, whatever I have is mine. We create property laws, and we make it so that no one is allowed to steal. And in doing so, your property is also protected. And so now, yes, there is a larger societal contract that covers the entirety of the community, but we can also enter into smaller social contracts with one another, where I agree to give you some of my resources for some of yours. And so because of that, we've now entered into an agreement, a contract with one another, where I give you some of my food or medicine or clothing, and you do the same for me. I agree to give you money, you agree to give me goods and services. We create this kind of reciprocal relationship with one another through the social contract. And in doing so, all of us are protected. Again, to really reiterate the point, the social contract is the idea that we give up certain freedoms. These are the freedoms that we would naturally have in the state of nature. We agree to give some of those up to gain societal protection. So under the social contract, all of us agree to no longer kill each other. So you are no longer allowed to kill when you desire. And in turn, you are granted the societal protection of not being killed. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, yeah, that sounds all good and fine, but what if somebody breaks the contract? Because people are still stolen from, they're lied to, people still kill, and people are hurt. These protections were supposed to be guaranteed don't always work out. What happens when somebody goes against the social contract? Ideally speaking, that person is supposed to be punished. This is where the idea of the law comes in. The law is meant to maintain the contract. And so, the idea of a judiciary and then fulfilling of that punishment is meant to fulfill the contract. It's meant to make sure that people continue to understand, yes, if you kill, you will be punished. If you steal, you will be punished. And again, this is all in an ideal sense. Because as you all probably are aware, it doesn't really work out like that ideally. We'll talk about this a little bit more towards the end of the video, but the social contract applicably, but the social contract in application, see, you work around it, in application doesn't always work the way that it is supposed to. Because under the idea of the truly ideal social contract, every single person is supposed to be held equally. This is why justice, the law, is meant to be blind. Because it shouldn't matter your race, your sexuality, your class, or income. None of that should matter. Because the idea is if you break the contract, then you should be held equally in the eyes of the law accountable. Now, a social contract is something very interesting in that it is written down in places as far as like governmental contracts go. We have like a Bill of Rights and we have amendments and a constitution and all of these laws we're supposed to follow. But social contracts of the individual nature aren't necessarily written down. They might be verbal contracts. But the interesting thing is a social contract doesn't have to be explicitly agreed to be required to have to follow it. Your presence in a location makes it so that you are now subject to the social contract. So if you've ever traveled from your hometown to the town over, they didn't stop you at the border of your town to the next one and go, do you swear to follow the laws of town B? No, they don't stop you there. If you traveled from one state to another, so let's say you travel from my home state of Virginia down to the state of North Carolina, they don't stop you at the border of North Carolina and go, do you hereby swear to follow all the laws of North Carolina and everything found within? No, they don't do that. They might stop you as you leave a country, but again, they don't offer you a Bill of Rights. They don't give you a list of laws not to follow. Most countries, some countries, if it's such a culture shock, they do say, hey, X, Y, and Z are illegal here. Don't do that. But a lot of countries don't do that. They just assume you will follow the law. They assume you'll know the law well enough not to break it. And maybe if you accidentally break the law in a foreign country, they'll cut you a break because you are not from around there. But technically, you're supposed to be held accountable. Ignorance under the social contract is not necessarily an excuse. And this is where kind of the social contract does get a little bit dangerous. Because think about all of the laws that get passed in our own country here in the United States. or just in the country where you live all the time. Laws get passed, and I guarantee you no one around can name all of the laws, let alone with the way that we try to word the laws in all of the jargon and just philosophical bullshit that gets put into the word of law. You know, the double, triple negatives that try to confuse you and trip you up. The law is very difficult for us to know fully and completely. And so this becomes a very big problem for the social contract. Another big problem for the social contract is what is known as defection. Defection is the idea that we don't follow the social contract when it's not within our best interest. And for example, a wonderful example of this is speeding. Every single one of you speeds down the road. That's defection, because we're all supposed to follow the law and follow the speed limit, but none of us probably do. We all probably speed, and that's defection. We change lanes illegally. That's defection. If you've ever jaywalked, you've broken the contract because rather than walking down to the corner where there is a legal place for you to cross, you go, no, it's faster to cross here, and you cross over. That's defection. It is the willful choice to go against the social contract when you know it's wrong, but you do it anyway because you think, well, nobody's going to get hurt from this, or I'm not going to get caught, or this, that, or the other. You don't think about it, or maybe you do, but you just don't care. And so you defect against the social contract. And as a moral theory, that would make you immoral. And under the eyes of the social contract, you should now be held accountable for defecting out of the contract. Now, this being said, let's go back to the point from a moment ago where I said, I'm messing up the word again, applicably, I got it, the social contract doesn't work the same for everybody. We see this all of the time. I mean, this is one of our big issues right now here in the United States with the arguments of police brutality and BLM. You know, it's this idea that we have this kind of systemic racism in our country where we treat individuals, persons of color, differently in the eyes of the law than non-persons of color. We have this issue where if you have money, you're likely going to get off the hook than if you don't. You know, it's that classist idea. You know, for example, if Justin Bieber kills a man, I'm not saying he has, this is just an example, but if Justin Bieber kills a man and you kill a man and you guys do it in the exact same way, you're likely going to serve more time than Justin Bieber will. Why? He's got money, he's got reputation, he's got fame. You're just some person who doesn't have money. So there is a racial aspect to discrimination in the law. There is a classist aspect to it. There is most definitely a sexist and gender-based aspect to it, as well as a sexuality-based aspect to it, because depending on where you live, the judge, the individual who is prosecuting you, very well might use that as part of your judgment. And so because of this, you might be penalized stricter, or maybe less strict because of those factors. And under the social contract, that's not right. It is not okay for us to do that. Under the social contract, we are all meant to be held equal. Regardless of your race, your class, your background, who you are as a person, if you break the law, you should be held accountable equally in the eyes of the law. Can we amend the social contract? Well, the simple answer to this is yes. Any social contract should be able to be amended. The reason for this is because unjust laws do exist, and we've seen this throughout human history. I mean, any type of slavery law, any type of segregation law, any discriminatory law that holds you as a lesser individual in a society is an unjust law. And under the idea of a social contract, living within the contract should make your life better than being outside of it. So if your life is made worse because of the contract, then that contract is not a moral one. Your life should be made better because of the contract. So if you're being discriminated against, or if you're being put on a lower pedestal in society than somebody else because of the wording of the law, or because of what the law allows, then the social contract is unjust and should be amended. And the way that we do this is through creating new laws. Yes, we could tear down the whole contract and build anew, or we could seek to amend the contract that we have. And really what determines this is how pervasive the systemic issues and the injustice goes within the contract and the society itself. Can the society be redeemed and have new laws built into it to fix it? Or do we have to start again because those systemic discriminatory issues are so pervasive that they don't allow for the contract to really be amended without really containing some of those still in it? So it really depends on the state of your society in that regard. Now, if the social contract fails you because the governing body is failing you? Well, this is another place where you could seek to protest or to seek to amend the contract or tear down the contract and rewrite it. You know, this idea of protest or overthrowing, because again, it's a contract. Contracts work two ways. You have to hold up your end of the contract. As a citizen, you are meant to follow the law and obey the law and not break it. And if you're caught breaking the law, you're meant to follow through with the punishment. On the other side of the contract, the government is meant to provide for you all of the amenities that it says it will provide for you. Good education, good infrastructure, safety, housing, all of those things that the government promises you, it's meant to provide. And if it doesn't provide it, then it has failed at its side of the social contract. At that point, if the government has failed in its side of the social contract, this is where elections come in. Bless you, Oliver. This is where... Yup. Sneezy McSneezy. Sneezy McSneezy cat. You good? You good? Oliver, you good? So as I was saying before my cat started sneezing, if the government doesn't uphold its side of the contract, this is where electing new officials comes in, or creating new laws, or protesting, or honestly, tearing down the government and building anew, as we've seen in revolutions throughout history. This is what happens when the social contract fails, is a new social contract is either amended or created in its place. Because again, the purpose of the social contract, to kind of sum up all of these points, is the social contract is meant to protect us from the dangers of the state of nature. It's meant to protect us from our fear of death. And so to create a social contract is to essentially join in an agreement with other people where you give up some of your natural freedoms and they give up the same natural freedoms so that we can all enjoy societal protection, so that we can all be safe and live good, happy, moral lives. But this only works if the social contract can maintain some semblance of equality and some assurance that your life will be better within the contract than outside of it. So a lot of the protests and the struggles that we see here in the United States, for example, in 2020, the protests, the BLM movement, all of these are the voices of individuals who feel that the social contract has failed them, that they feel that they're not being represented or granted the same equal protections as everybody else. And so it is a cry, an outcry to amend the social contract to grant them the same protections. Because again, we're all meant to be equal. And the social contract only works if equality is there. And if equality isn't there, then the contract has failed and it has to be amended. So, thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you're able to walk away from here understanding Hobbesian social contract theory a little bit better than you did before. And hopefully after this video, you can kind of take this idea of the social contract theory and apply it to your everyday life. You can watch the news, you can see the things going on in the world, and you can ask yourself, is this just? Is the social contract theory being upheld and maintained? Is equality being maintained? So again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.